Hello, my name is Karen Patterson from the Rowallan and Slieve Crib Community Twinning Group. We believe passionately in local history projects, and we have commissioned a series of online lectures by historian Horace Reid. Horace has been researching our local history in County Down since 1990. Horace presents regularly to local historical societies and publishes in local newspapers. Over the years, he has compiled a wide variety of highly illustrated slideshows. We are grateful for the support from Newrymourne and Down District Council for this important historical project. I shall now hand over to Horace to introduce the presentation.
Behind me is Eden of Addy Hill on the Montalto estate in Ballynahinch. In June 1798, this was the assembly point for the United Irishmen, about 5,000 of them. On the afternoon of Tuesday, the 12th, lots of womenfolk came with provisions to feed the men. And among them was Betsy Gray, a 20-year-old from North Down. As the fighting loomed that afternoon, the woman wisely took off home, but Betsy stayed and participated in the fighting the next day and was killed in the rout afterwards. There were quite a few rebels killed, but Betsy is the most famous of them. And right away, from the beginning, she entered legend. There are a few historical facts to establish that Betsy actually existed, but she doesn't depend on her facts. Her legend depends on how it was elaborated over the 2 centuries since. And it was elaborated by journalists, by novelists, by scholars, and by painters. So what I want to do is outline how all those contributors helped develop her legend over the subsequent 2 centuries. So that tells satirized. Right. If we're talking about Ballynahinch history, one of the most famous names you hear in connection with Ballynahinch is Betsy Gray. Betsy was a 20-year-old who fought briefly at the Battle of Ballynahinch in June 1798 and was killed shortly afterwards in the immediate aftermath. That's how you see central in this painting. This painting was executed by Bill Gatt, 1998, on the bicentennial of her death. On the left, you see Ballynahinch Windmill, and you see Ballynahinch in flames being burned down by General Nugent, and you see General Nugent's red coats and his 6-pound cannon on the left. On the right, you see Mockerdroll Parish Church, and beyond it, Eden of Addy Hill, where the rebels congregated, and you see the rebels on the right with their pikes. In the foreground, you see Betsy with her brother George and her fiancé Willie Bowl. And then on the right foreground, you see them in death after they've been killed. Betsy is famous, as I say, and this irritates professional historians because Betsy would be better known than the genuine historical figures like Wolfe Tone or Henry Joy McCracken or the historians object that she's not real, unlike the other figures. Some people say that she's not the maid of Down, she's made up. So, in fact, there is enough documentary evidence to establish that she existed. But it is true that a lot of her history is concocted in folklore. So I'll start first of all by saying what facts establish that she existed, and then I'll go on to say how the folklore developed, how her legend developed, who originated the folklore, and what their motivation was. I gave this talk at Montalto House for the Stranmillis Big House in Ireland group. So part of this presentation will feature Montalto House as well. The story starts for Betsy on the 12th of June 1798 when she turned up on Edenavati Hill. So that is the tall hill beside Montalto House inside the Montalto domain. And if we're looking for facts about Betsy, then we get them right away from a man called James Thompson, who at the time was a 16-year-old, lived at Spa. So the rebels needed provisions, and Thompson's family sent provisions with a couple of servant girls, and Thompson went along with them. Thompson's a good witness because in later life, after 1832, he was appointed Professor of Mathematics at Glasgow University. So you can't get a better witness than that. And he says that when he came to Edenavati Hill on the afternoon of Tuesday the 12th, there were on the ground a considerable number of females bringing the provisions. Then he continues to say, it is said that 2 or 3 of them remained on the field during the battle and did some fighting and were as valiant as the men. So this is our first documented evidence that there was a woman or women fighting at the battle. Moving on, the battle's now over. The rebels have been defeated, and the rebels are scattering all over the countryside, being pursued by the dragoons, horsemen with giant sabres. And the function of dragoons is to make sure that once the rebels scatter, they don't reassemble. So a bunch of the Newtonards rebels took to the flat ground and headed for Hillsborough. So it's easy to run on flat ground, but the trouble is that when the horsemen come after you, it's even easier for the horsemen. So pretty soon the Newtonards rebels were overtaken by the Hillsborough horse yeomen. A lot of them captured, taken off and imprisoned in Hillsborough. Good few of them killed, including Betsy and her colleagues. The wiser rebels you see in the background in the hills on the right-hand side, leading up to Slieve Croob, the wiser rebels took off up those hills where it was more difficult for the horses to chase them, and they had a higher survival rate. So this is Betsy's attempted escape route after the battle. The horsemen caught up with Betsy and her 2 companions near this crossroads. So this is one of the back roads to Lisburn. And if you're looking for Betsy's grave, these are the landmarks. On the left, by the way, in the background is Machernach Fort, an old Irish ring fort. So that's one of the essential landmarks. So Thomas Nielsen, one of the Hillsborough yeomen on horseback, shot Betsy through the eye. And Jack Gill cut off her gloved hand with his sword. So there's Betsy minus her hand. The problem with the cavalry was that if you were fleeing and a horseman came after you with a sabre and you saw the sabre coming down, your first instinct was to put up your arm to defend your face. But the only result of that was that you lost your arm. And here we get another eyewitness, and this is Mary Ann McCracken. This is her photograph in old age. Mary Ann is the sister of Henry Joy McCracken. So she says Elizabeth Gray and her friends fled and were overtaken by the Hillsborough yeomen, who belonged to Mr. Mussenden's corps. They were overtaken at the back of Machernach Hill. So there she's mentioned the locality, Machernach. She confirms that Thomas Nielsen from Annahilt shot Betsy through her right eye. Their bodies were stripped. James Little's wife, he's the other yeoman, when the bodies were stripped, James Little took Betsy's dress home, and his wife then was later seen wearing it. And significant detail, it was a green dress that Betsy had been wearing. So an officer of the 22nd Light Dragoons came up to the site of the killing and reprimanded the yeomen and said that the killing of a young woman was entirely unwarranted. So right away, within minutes, there is outrage generated by the killing of a young woman. Mary Ann said that the yeomen belonged to Mr. Mussendon's corps. So Daniel Mussendon was actually a Presbyterian elder himself, and he lived at Larchfield, not too far away from where Betsy was killed, on the road on the back road to Lisburn. And Larchfield still exists and is now a hospitality complex. Betsy and the two boys were buried in a field belonging to the Armstrongs, not far away from where they were killed. But as we see later, they were buried in soft ground in what was a bog. So that was entirely disrespectful and unsatisfactory. So after a while, after some months, whenever the war circumstances quietened down, the relatives then came, disinterred the bodies, and took them away for proper burial in a proper cemetery. So we have one source in 1914 saying that Betsy's remains were removed to Garvaghy Parish Church. Now, this is Garvaghy near Dromara, not Garvaghy Portadown. And you can see the parish church in the distance near the top of the hill, the grey building. And now we're in the churchyard, and the three headstones in the foreground, they are grey headstones in the Grey family burying ground. The reading that we can see on the surviving stones are for 1724 and 1823. Looking for some more documentary evidence, it appeared 3 days after the battle in the Freedmen's Journal in Dublin on the 16th. And they reported that at the Battle of Ballynahinch, a pair of very handsome women who were fantastically dressed in green, one called the Goddess of Liberty and the other the Goddess of Reason, both unhappy women were shot in the conflict. So yet more documentary evidence that a woman fought at the Battle of Ballynahinch and one or more of them killed. And the detail again that they were wearing green. That we'll find out that is significant. More documentary evidence, some of it appears just a couple of months after the battle, written by Thomas Ledley Birch, the minister of First Saintfield Presbyterian Church. At that stage, the ex-minister of First Saintfield, because he'd been implicated in the rebellion and he had to get out quickly and go to America before he got strung up. So Birch says that he's the one who tells us that the rebel dead were 58 persons, and then 4 or 5 more, 58 shot, killed at the battle, and 4 or 5 more shot by the dragoons when they were scouring the countryside. And among those 4 or 5, there was a young woman killed. Now, Thomas Birch had a brother, James Birch, who was also a Presbyterian minister in First Dromara. And long after James Birch died, his nephew testified that James Birch, the minister, knew Betsy Gray. He said, my uncle knew the rebel girl Gray. She was a pretty girl with golden curls. So some of this evidence is contradictory. This source says that Betsy comes from Dromara. You'll hear others saying different. Betsy was first named a bit earlier in 1810 by a poetess called Mary Balfour. We don't know a lot about Mary, but we know she was associated with Edward Bunting. Edward Bunting was the organist at what later was St Anne's Cathedral. And he organised the Belfast Harp Festival in 1792. He lodged with the McCrackens, that's Mary Ann McCracken's family, and he was associated with Mary Balfour. So 1810, Mary wrote a poem about Betsy. The star of evening slowly rose through shades of twilight gleaming. It shone to witness Erin's woes, her children's lifeblood streaming. 'Twas then, sweet star, thy pensive ray fell on the cold, unconscious clay that wraps the breast of Betsy Grey in softened lustre beaming. Oh, spare that life, her brother cries with indignation glowing. Tears tremble in her lover's eyes, his arms around her throwing. But lovers' brothers' sighs are vain, even in their sight the maid is slain, and now on Erin's ruined plain their mingled blood is flowing. So there we have a poem, 1910, actually naming Betsy Grey. Come 1828, Charles Teeling. Charles Teeling was actively involved in the rebellion. Escaped, didn't participate in the fighting because he represented what were called the defenders. You had two paramilitary groups, the United Irishmen, principally Presbyterian, and the defenders, principally Catholic. So Teeling's bridged both of them, and he was active in the Slieve Croob area and near Decamot Mountain. So he published his history of the Irish Rebellion in 1828. He mentioned that he had read Mary Balfour's poem about Betsy. He makes a point that there were many deaths at the battle, but this one is the one that sticks out. This is the one that's most striking. It's the one that's remembered. He says that Betsy comes from Newtownards, so here again we get a contradiction in some of the evidence. And he confirms what the Reverend Birch of Dromara said, that she was a good-looking girl. She was the perfection of female beauty. Come 1844, Dr. Richard Madden, a medical doctor, started to compile the history of 1798 and the history of the United Irishmen. So in one of his volumes, Antrim and Dowd in 98, he consulted Mary Ann McCracken. And the details we read earlier about Betsy being killed at Mochernoghill, those are taken from Dr. Madden's history and from Mary Ann. So Mary Ann says that Elizabeth Grey came from Colinchie. So here's another problem. Is it Colinchie or Dromara? Says she arrived in Ballynahinch the Saturday before the battle. Says that she rode a pony in the battle and carried a green flag. So now her story's becoming elaborated, that she rode a rode a pony and carried a green flag, and repeats the detail that she wore a green petticoat. Now, here's the significance of the green petticoat. Green was worn by the United Irishmen and was their symbol. So in the approach to the rebellion, and the government knew that the rebellion was coming, and Ulster was flooded with troops in anticipation of the rebellion. So a Frenchman visiting Northern Ireland in 1796 said that he came to Banbridge and the soldiers promenaded through the marketplace and obliged women who were wearing anything green, a ribbon or otherwise, to take it off. So around that time, a girl in Newry decided to defy the soldiers. And she displayed her green garters and said she wasn't taking them off. And what were they going to do about it? So they showed her what they were going to do about it. So garters or not, they took them off. And she was sent home in a state of indecent exposure. So the trouble with women wearing green is that it invited assault from the soldiers, and that would include indecent assault. Now, in Betsy's case, if she was wearing a green dress, immediately after the battle and in proximity to the battle, the wearing of the green was her death warrant. Moving on now to 1861, William Macomb wrote a guide to Belfast and the Giant's Causeway, and he included in that a lot of information about Ballynahinch, by then a tourist resort with a spa, and he wrote a lot of detail about the Battle of Ballynahinch. Now he says that Betsy's called Elizabeth Grey. He goes with Mary Ann McCracken and says she comes from Killinchy. Echoes the detail that she was of extraordinary beauty and daring courage. Cites the Balfour poem, confirms that Jack Gill killed her, and says that she was on the back of a pony and was carrying a green flag. Now, Betsy on her tiny steed bore high her flag of green, where'er the battle fiercely raged, Killinchy's lass was seen. So, does she come from Killinchy or does she come from Drumara? 1893, the respected Presbyterian historian, the Reverend Thomas Witherow, in his History of the Irish Presbyterians, here's more documentary evidence about Betsy. He says that a young girl called Betsy went into the battlefield with her sweetheart and her brother, was killed by Jack Gill and Thomas Nilsson. And another bit of poetry: woe unto thee, Anna Hilt, and woe be on the day when brother, lover, both were slain, and with them Betsy Gray. Now, Witherow says that Betsy came from Drumara, and that she was an Anglican, and he cites the baptismal records in support of that. But more recently, someone has examined the records of First Drumara Presbyterian, and you get those names occurring in the baptismal records. Betsy Gray and her brother George appearing about that time. So not only have you a possibility of a Betsy and Drumara, but you've got two possibilities, one Anglican and one Presbyterian. Subsequently, you had another poem, Eden of Addy, a poetical tale, written 1822. Then two novels, one written by Mrs. Clark from Canallan in 1875. Now, there's a bit of poetic license. Mrs. Clark decided that Betsy would survive and get married and emigrate safely to the US. And Mary Dammont, 1887, another novel about Betsy now called Peggy, and the tale not set in County Down, but in the glens of Antrim. But The piece of literature which confirmed Betsy's fame and made her famous more widely was published in 1886 by a journalist called W.G. Little. So he founded a couple of newspapers, and in one of his newspapers, the North Down Herald, he published a series of tales about the 1798 rebellion in the Ards Peninsula. So Charles Dickens at the time, he wrote his novels in serials. So he would do one episode a week. It would end with suspense and excitement, and then that would make his readers buy the paper the next week to get the next episode. So W.G. Little wrote the same way. And then when the novel was complete in serial form, then he republished it in book form. Now, he did stage acts where he imitated the Ulster Scots accent of the Ards Peninsula. And nowadays we're a bit doubtful about the Ulster Scots language, but of course in the 1880s it was still spoken as a genuine dialect in the Ards Peninsula. And he was a trained shorthand scribe, and he knew about phonetics, so he could record the Ulster Scots accent accurately. And the other thing is, he went on stage imitating the farmers of the Ards Peninsula, and was very busy giving those stage performances all over East Ulster, so that the accent he was using was well understood and enjoyed outside the Ards Peninsula. When he wrote the novel, he included in it actual participants during the battle, like the Byres or like William Steele Dixon, the Presbyterian minister from Portaferry. So people reading his novel knew the people that he was talking about. It was written in the Ulster Scots vernacular, so his readership were familiar with that and enjoyed it and understood what he was saying. And it's not a bad history of the 1798 rebellion, because he bases it on actual facts, like government proclamations, like General Nugent threatening to burn down Saintfield and Ballynahinch. All of those actual, factual documentary sources are included in his novel. So it's a documentary novel. It's half fact. It's half fiction. So it's sold very well, and it's sold very well in subsequent generations. And there are some people who say that in County Down, there were two books which were always in every County Down home. So one of them was the Bible, and the other was Betsy Gray. Now, remember that he published the book in 1886, but that is the date that the first Home Rule Bill was published. So this is when Ireland wanted to break away from English rule and be ruled by Irishmen alone from Dublin, which didn't please the Ulster Protestants, and they vigorously opposed Home Rule. So starting in 1886, there was a campaign in Ulster to oppose the imposition of Home Rule. And you had Protestants in County Down clinging to the idea of being governed from Westminster. Now, this is no time to publish a novel where the heroine is somebody who fights against English rule. So how on earth did he get away with publishing that novel and it being so popular? Well, the answer was that he had a personal following himself, and It was popular because it was written in the Ulster Scots dialect, and it included localities and personalities that they knew. Little included in this novel details about Lord Castlereagh. So Lord Castlereagh of Mount Stewart was a principal secretary at Dublin Castle and principally responsible for defeating the 1798 rebellion. He later committed suicide. So in his novel, Little is very unsympathetic towards Castlereagh. Which again is going against the tide, because Castlereagh's descendant at that time was Lord Lieutenant in Ireland. So quite a lot of journalistic courage in publishing at that time, and he got away with it. I forgot to say that I said that the novel, W.G. Little's novel, continued to be published. And it continued to be published throughout the period of agitation during the passage of the Home Rule Bill. So it was republished in 1913, and it was 1914 that the Home Rule Bill was actually passed. And I marvelled that W.G. Little got away with publishing a rebel novel at the very time when there was most loyalty for the British Crown. During the Home Rule period, there was a great resurgence in membership of the Orange Order. And W.G. Little wasn't a member of the Orange Order, wouldn't join it. He was a Mason, but he took care not to offend the Orange men, so that the original version of the Shan Van Vocht said, "The orange will decay." So Little, when he copied that into his novel, was careful to omit the word orange and substitute the word tyrants. Now we're on to 1896, and such is Betsy's fame that someone decides it's time she had a monument. So 100 years, nearly 100 years after she was killed, someone surfaces from London claiming to be a relative. He goes to Hastings, the tombstone manufacturers in Downpatrick, and he commissions a plinth with Betsy's name on it. So it's inscribed Elizabeth Grey, George Grey, Willie Bowl, killed 13th of June, 1798. This is installed not where Betsy's actually buried, because of course Betsy's reburied up in Garvaghy, but it's installed where she was killed originally. So if you're looking for a grave there, well, there was a grave, but it's now empty. However, that's where the plinth was erected, and this was on Armstrong's farm. So if anybody wanted to come and look at the grave site, the Armstrongs said, "Fine, go ahead, no trouble." But such was Betsy's fame that she became famous not just among the Unionist community in County Down, but among the Nationalist community in Belfast. Because in County Down you had the Unionist community opposing Home Rule, but in Belfast and elsewhere you had a big community supporting Home Rule. And in support of Home Rule, two ladies founded a magazine called the Shan Van Vocht, described as a leading journalistic platform for advanced Irish nationalism. So this is Alice Milligan and Ithna Carberry. Alice Milligan, both interesting, but Alice is really interesting. She's got bright red hair. She's not very big. She's a Protestant. She's a Methodist, and her parents come from Bangor, County Down. So it occurs to them that there is no memorials to 1798 heroines or heroes in Ulster. And this new plinth actually is the only memorial, 1798 memorial in the north. And it's the only 1798 memorial to a woman in all of Ireland. So in their promotion of the notion of Irish independence, they promote Betsy as a nationalist heroine. So it's not just that she turns up at Eden Nevada bringing food for the men. They elevate her to heroine status. So she's compared to Boadicea, who fought the Romans, or she's compared to the warrior Deborah in the Bible. And they thought that it was time, if they were erecting statues to other 1798 heroes, well, it's time we erected one to a female hero like Betsy. Mounted on her charger, brandishing her patriot sword when she led the Hearts of Down in glorious battle. Now here we have further elaboration of the myth. We know that she was on a pony previously. We know that she wore green, but now she's not on a pony, she's on a stallion. Yes, she's got her sword, but she's no longer a participant. She's a leader of the Hearts of Down. So she, in nationalist terms now, she becomes a nationalist heroine and leading nationalist sentiment in support of Home Rule. Nowadays, we're used to the police ombudsman investigating crimes by the Crown forces. This is not a new feature. William Ewart Gladstone, one-time Prime Minister, and at that stage, 1889, he was in opposition. He decided to investigate British military atrocities in Ireland. So he wrote to W.G. Little saying that he liked his book, Betsy Gray, but could he provide more details and more footnotes? And the book would be better. So W.G. Little, that's his photograph on the right-hand side, Little thought the book was doing very well, thank you, and didn't want to modify it. Now, the grave became a place of pilgrimage, not just for County Down Presbyterians, but for Belfast nationalists. So the two ladies who wrote the Shan Van Vocht, they turned up and laid flowers at Betsy's grave in 1896 and in 1897. So parties of visitors from Belfast became frequent and became larger. And this didn't go down with the Armstrongs or their neighbours in Ballycreen. Ballycreen and Mockernock were solidly Presbyterian and Protestant, and they respected the Sabbath, and they didn't like large numbers of nationalists turning off of Belfast and desecrating the Sabbath, as they thought. Plus, they didn't take to the idea of nationalists visiting at all. Now, note the shift in political sentiment in Ballycreen and Mockernock townlands. If you went back 100 years to 1798, half of Mockernock were like Betsy and were rising in opposition and attacking British forces. So Samuel Edgar, minister of what later became Eden Grove Presbyterian Church, when he was in Mockernock on the 9th of June 1798, he saw Presbyterian rebels digging up gunpowder and making ready for the imminent fighting. And they wanted to know if the gunpowder was still dry enough after it had been buried in the ground. So they put a match to a wee bit of it, and the gunpowder was still dry, and it went off, and it inflicted first-degree burns on a girl who was standing close. So 1798, you have plenty of rebels in in Machernach who were opposing the British Crown come forward to 1898, and the political opinion has shifted entirely the opposite direction, and now Machernach is completely in support of the British Crown. Eventually, there was a confrontation between the Machernach Presbyterians and the nationalist visitors from Belfast. So we've got a good eyewitness, a man who I remember, Jimmy Mills. In 1898, he was a teenager, age 16. So he recorded his recollections to the Morning Observer in 1968. And he said, 1st of May 1898, there was to be a special ceremony at the grave to mark the centenary of the 98 Rising. Local Protestants were inflamed because it was being organised by Roman Catholics and other Home Rulers. They didn't like these people claiming Betsy, and they became so enraged that they decided to prevent the ceremony from taking place. Now, this is a valuable testimony, because an accusation will later be made that the local Protestants were opposed to Betsy. They weren't. They liked Betsy and thought she was one of them. What they didn't like was her memory being hijacked by another political persuasion. So the local RIC knew there was going to be trouble. They imported some more reinforcements from Downpatrick, but such were the crowds that they couldn't keep the two sides apart. I saw men coming to wreck the monument so as to put a stop to such ceremonies. They were big, powerful men, and no one could have stopped them. There was Mrs. Watt, a big, heavy woman, who was carrying a 16-pound sledgehammer, and her 3 sons, and William Simpson, and then others. When I gave this talk in Machernach a couple of years ago and quoted the names on the screen, there were people in the audience who were quite chuffed because this was some of their ancestors who had been at the fighting. So they demolished the plinth, and there in the foreground is what remains of the plinth. And if you look closely, you can see some of the names carved on it, E-L-I-Z, for instance. So the local Presbyterians made short work of the memorial. The next year, another deputation turned up from Belfast, nationalists again, and they wanted to go on to Edenvalley Hill and pay homage to the United Irishmen. So Edenvalley, as I told you, is in the Montalto domain. So they arrived at the Gate Lodge and asked could they come in. At that stage, Montalto was owned by Captain Dick Carr, Unionist MP for County Down, master of the County Down Staghounds, and Captain Dick said no way could they go up Edenvalley, so they were turned away. The wrecking of Betsy Gray, Betsy Gray's grave made the papers, and there were cartoons of the Orange Men dancing on her grave and taking the wreaths and wearing them as decorations. So you can see a lot of exaggerations there. The cartoon represents it as a graveyard with railings, so it was nothing of the kind. Of course, it was a field. And the wrecking of the grave was brought up in the House of Commons at Westminster on the 12th of May 1898, when 3 MPs from Ireland questioned the Chief Secretary, Gerald Balfour. Now, come forward another month, and the Orange Men decided to get their PR right. So they applied to, the District Lords applies to hold the district demonstration on Edenavady Hill. And of course, they get permission from Captain Carr. So they decide to bring along somebody who knows his history, and this was the Reverend Puller, the Dean of Down. So Puller decided to put everything in its proper context. In 1798, he said, the United men in the North, carried away with glowing accounts from their friends in America, dreamed of a great republic. Out of every evil, however, God brought some good. Every constitutional reform which the United men desired, and every grievance of which they had complained, had found a remedy long ago by a Parliament of the United Kingdom. Now here is Puller explaining how come in 1798 Machernach was a rebel stronghold, and how come in 1898 they were strong supporters of government. It was because in the intervening 100 years their grievances had been remedied. Presbyterians, it became respectable to be a Presbyterian. You had Presbyterians elected as MPs for the first and sitting in Parliament in London. And Mr. Puller went on to take a dig at the nationalists who had arrived at the grave in Ballycreen. He said, the night before the Battle of Ballynahinch, the Catholics deserted. They would not face the dangers of the next day. They decorate the grave of Betsy Gray, but they had not the courage to fight beside her. So he's seizing ownership of Betsy, and he's taking the moral high ground. He said if an inhabitant of Ballynahinch could stand there that day in 1898, he would see great changes. He would see the descendants of the United Men in thousands praising God for the Union and wearing orange sashes. I can see many a brave girl who would do a noble deed for her brother or sweetheart, just like the heroine Betsy Gray on Edenavady Hill. So this is Mr. Puller recasting Betsy in Protestant terms. So she's no longer a wild-eyed rebel on a white charger with a green flag and a sword, leading the nationalist hordes against the British. To his mind, she's a loyal wee member of the Girls' Brigade, and she just turned up at Edenavady with a packed lunch for her boys and a change of underwear, quite different from the nationalist concept. On the centenary of the 1788 rebellion, there was a parade held in Belfast, and that provoked rioting. And Betsy now got an airing in Belfast, so Lizzie McSorley was mounted on a white horse, and she led the parade down the Falls Road. So not only had there been rioting in Ballynahinch, but there was widespread rioting throughout Belfast. Peters Hill, Dover Street, Durham Street, Millfield, North Street, Broadway, Donegal Road, Walmer Street. 103 policemen injured, and the army had to be brought in to disperse them. So more dragoons waving sabres had to come along and disperse the rioters. So Betsy now has a presence not just in Ballynahinch, not just in County Down, but now she's known in Belfast. And shortly after that, she's well known in Dublin, because Lizzie McSorley takes off along with 10,000 other visitors from the north and participates in the 1798 centenary parade in Dublin. Meantime, the agitation for Home Rule is continuing. In July 1913, Lord Carson turns up at the Six Road Ends. Six Road Ends W.G. Little, when he wrote his novel Betsy Grey, said that Betsy came from the Six Road Ends. That is a junction between Newtonards and Donegal. It's now gone, so it's lucky I took this photograph. It's now the Six Road Ends roundabout. So Lord Carson held a UVF rally at the Six Road Ends in opposition to Home Rule, and this outraged nationalists because they said that this was a desecration of Betsy Grey's memory, her having come from the Six Road Ends district, or the cotton townland. Betsy's fame continued. It was continued by the historian F.J. Bigger. He edited the Ulster Journal of Archaeology. He took over where Dr. Madden left off as historian of the United Irishmen. Among other things, he explored 1798. Like Madden, he went back to eyewitnesses, or eyewitnesses, of course, were dead by that time, but those who had talked to eyewitnesses and had memories and could access the oral tradition. And W.G. Little was dead by then. Little died in 1896. But publication of Betsy Grey, the novel, continued. And it was F.J. Bigger who published the 1913 edition of Betsy Grey, an illustrated edition. Another writer who mentioned Betsy was Cathal O'Byrne in 1946, a series of articles in the Irish News, summarised in As I Roved Out, and one of those articles was recounted a visit to Betsy's grave. More locally in Ballynahinch, we had an antiquarian, famous antiquarian, Colin Johnson Robb. Like Bigger, he accessed the oral tradition. So stories that you won't hear anywhere else, Robb has recorded by talking to people around County Down and recording their memories. Thankfully, he published a great deal as well. So he published in the Irish Sword, Irish News, Dromore Leader, and Mord Observer. And most valuable is he put into circulation a portrait of Betsy. And he said this portrait had been painted by a portrait painter called Edward John Newell. That's Newell's picture on the right-hand side. And the trouble was that Newell, as well as being friendly with the United Irishmen and painting their portraits, was a government informer. No better person to be an informer if he was closely acquainted with the United leadership. Jim Hawthorne, founder and publisher of the Morning Observer, republished the Betsy Grey novel in 1967. It had previously been republished in the Newtonards Spectator 1960. And Jim Hawthorne, being a journalist like W.G. Little, went out around the countryside and accumulated memories of what people remembered or had heard about the 1798 period. And in fact, he was able to retrieve part of the railings from Betsy's grave. Jim Hawthorne himself was reared in Ballykeel, not too far from where Betsy was killed. So he did the same as W.G. Little. He published the Betsy Grey novel in serial format, and then when he had finished that, he republished the book entirely in book format. And all the new material he had dug up about 1798, he included in a 40-page appendix. So if you can get your hands on this book, it's probably the definitive edition of the Betsy Gray novel. Come the 200th anniversary in 1998, Down Museum did an exhibition about the rebellion. It included Betsy not wearing a green dress, but wearing something from Laura Ashley. But it mightn't have been a green dress, but it still got her shot. In Ballynahinch, Brum Henderson, former chairman of Ulster Television, established a series of murals, including one of Betsy Gray painted by Bill Gatt. And the Down Museum exhibition included the gory detail of Betsy losing her hand. Earlier, in 1978, someone painted a painting of Betsy nude and wrapped in a Union Jack, of all things, and that was exhibited in the Swift Gallery in Carrick in 1998. Thanks to Ethne Carberry and her friends, Betsy became part of the Ulster nationalist psyche. So the GAA in County Down established the Betsy Gray Cup. And there's a press cutting lower down where you see that Kilcleaf won the Betsy Gray Cup. In 1998, the Sinn Féin established a branch in Ballynahinch, and they named their Cumann the Betsy Gray Cumann. And Seamus Heaney, Betsy's fame spread all over Ulster. So Seamus Heaney remembers that he played the part of the blacksmith in a Betsy Gray drama in Ballycreen. And the observation was made that in Ballycreen they didn't know a lot about 1916, but they knew a lot about 1798 and about Betsy. Come 2008, Kieran McCarthy, an Alliance councillor, suggested that there be a Betsy Gray historical trail established in the Ards Peninsula. So, you know the thinking among some that if the opposition vote for it, then unionists have to vote against it. So a unionist councillor, Julie, got on his hind legs and said, no, you couldn't have this historical trail. And anyway, Betsy wasn't real. She was a creature of myth. She was invented. Now, that's not the right way to handle things, to deny history. And back in 1898, the Orange men knew better, and they had the Reverend Puller to give them a proper grip on history. So the unionists who gave those opinions were quickly shot down and were mocked in the pages of the Irish News. They didn't know their history. Of course, Betsy was real. And Eamon Phoenix, the historian from Stranmillis, was produced to say there was no doubt that Betsy existed. There, by the way, is the Betsy mural in its heyday in Windmill Street in Ballynahinch, and the painter, Bill Gatt, who painted it. Now, unfortunately, it was dive bombed by a seagull not long after that. And it took a while before it was cleaned, and in the meantime, the seagull's alkali deposits had eaten through the canvas. So that splendid mural couldn't be repaired and no longer exists. Betsy was raised in the Assembly in 2007. Again, Kieran McCarthy, MLA, wanted a history trail, and Iris Robinson wasn't too enthusiastic, but said yes, she knew about Betsy and had mentioned her before. Now, the same year as some unionists were saying Betsy didn't exist, you had the Ulster Scots Agency saying, of course she existed, and she was one of ours. She was an Ulster Scot. So they put out a leaflet celebrating Betsy, and they took the opportunity to republish the novel. The novel, every time it's published, it goes out of print because it's always bought up, and that edition was quickly sold out as well. So yes, Betsy is a nationalist icon, but there's still plenty of Protestant enthusiasm for Betsy. In 1996, Ian Adamson, the late Ian Adamson, then Lord Mayor of Belfast, had a Rolls Royce, and he christened his Rolls Royce Betsy Gray. 2008, the late Lord Laird, Jimmy Laird, reenacted the Battle of Battle of Saintfield in Saintfield town, and the proceedings were hosted by the Orange Men in Saintfield and based in Saintfield Orange Hall. So you can get Protestant endorsement of Betsy, and at that reenactment you had Betsy riding down the main street in Saintfield. You can even get the Betsy novel on Kindle, and all the other slate of writings by W.G. Little, all available on Kindle. And the Morn Observer edition of Betsy Gray is available on the internet, so if you can't buy it anywhere, go to lisburn.com and you'll find the entire book online for free. One new novel written about Betsy quite recently, and one written in 2016 by Conor O'Clery. Conor O'Clery is the Irish Times journalist who witnessed the destruction of the Twin Towers at 9/11. So in retirement he wrote a novel about Betsy, and this is him visiting her grave at Garvaghy. At the University of Ulster, they have an Ulster Scots education project, and Betsy Gray, the novel, is part of the curriculum, because if you want to know about the Ulster Scots dialect, you learn a good bit about it from the novel. And Betsy has become the subject of a major academic study. In 2018, a professor from Israel, a chap called Guy Biner from the Ben Gurion University, came to Ballynahinch, and I took him up to Montalto and showed him the battle site and whatnot. So he spent 10 years researching Betsy and 1798, and he published a book which is 700 pages long about 1798, and there are 300 references to Betsy in it. Now, Biner makes the point that there's little documentary evidence about Betsy, and we don't know exactly who she was, but that doesn't matter. There's a huge oral tradition, and mainstream historians can get upset about reliance on a myth and on a legend, but he says that myths and legend are important, and they connect with the public. So if you want to know every single detail about Betsy, you can find it in the index in that huge book. 2016, Betsy appeared at the fair, the Harvest and Country Living Festival at Montalto. This time Betsy having a pony, as she should have done, and dressed in a green dress. And this Harvest Festival, supported by all shades of political opinion. In the photograph you have unionist councillors and SDLP launching the reenactment in 2014. And 2014 and 2016, there was a reenactment of the Battle of Ballynahinch, actually in the streets of Ballynahinch. So at the top you had the redcoats in the British Army, and the bottom, wearing green, you had the rebels headed by General Monroe. So there was no blood lost, no bones broken. It was all good, clean fun. It was more of a rugby scrum than a battle. And General Nugent and General Monroe were very, very civil to each other, didn't fall out. So General Nugent explained to General Monroe that he was breaching a determination of the Parades Commission. A further enactment with the game festival at Montalto House. Betsy did some of her fighting in the vicinity of Montalto House, and there you had Betsy in the green dress turning out. Montalto House was occupied by the rebels during the fighting, and they fired out at the Monaghan militia, who got very upset and then put Montalto House on fire. So General Nugent intended for Ballynahinch to be burned down, but he didn't intend Montalto House to be burned down. So the soldiers all had to go down to the lake and get water and put the fire out in Montalto. The producers of the game fair decided that they would have a post-match analysis. So the two generals were interviewed on television afterwards to say how the fighting had gone, sort of a match of the day analysis. So no doubt General Monroe asked for a returned fixture. Getting to the end, summarising what I've told you, there's enough documentary evidence to establish that Betsy's existence, but we don't know a lot about her. There are, I think, four different versions of where she possibly originated. So we know she existed, but precisely where she came from and who her family were, that's all arguable. Betsy doesn't worry that there's no little documentary evidence about her. Independent of the evidence, her legend has flourished magnificently, and it doesn't matter about the history books. She's enjoyed a continuing career. And interestingly, ownership of her legend is disputed on the 100th anniversary, and is still disputed between nationalists and unionists. A lot of people have helped me put this presentation together, and I've listed them there. Final slide. This is Betsy's first gravesite. This is the bog in Ballycreen where she was buried first. Soft ground and not too hard to dig a grave. Important feature of this photograph, if you notice left on the skyline, behind a bush you see a hill, so that is Mockernock Hill, Mockernock Fort. So that tells us that Mary Ann McCracken was right, that Betsy was killed at the back of Mockernock Hill. Right, that's all I'm going to tell you. That's the end of the presentation, and I hope you've enjoyed that.